Imagine waking up, the taste of stale sleep still in your mouth, reaching for your coffee mug with that groggy expectation of another peaceful morning, only to look out your window and see that your world has literally been carved apart. That was my Tuesday. I walked out onto the porch of the farmhouse my grandma Rose left me, expecting to smell the crisp pine air of Black Mountain, North Carolina. But instead, the air was thick with the acrid stench of diesel fumes and wet, churned earth. And there, staring back at me like a jagged wound in the landscape, was a 6-foot-deep trench circling my entire property. I was trapped, my truck useless, emergency access cut off, standing on an island of my own making. While standing on the other side of this dirt moat, smiling like she'd just won a pageant, was Victoria Sterling, the self-appointed queen of the Summit Heights Association. She stood there in her pristine white pantsuit, directing a crew of exhausted laborers, looking at me with eyes that held absolutely no soul, just the cold calculation of a predator who thinks she finally cornered her prey. But what Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have realized in her arrogance, was that while she was digging a hole to trap me, she was actually digging her own grave. Because my new 4K security cameras were rolling, catching every shovel of dirt, every smirk, every illegal order. Before we get to the handcuffs and the federal agents, you need to understand how a retired Army engineer like me, Jack Sarge Reynolds, ended up in a turf war with a real estate banshee. After 22 years of fixing generators in deserts and a divorce that left my heart feeling like scorched earth, I came home to Black Mountain to heal. Grandma Rose left me her 1940s farmhouse, a place that smelled of old cedar and cinnamon, sitting on 2 acres of land that felt like the only solid ground I had left in the world. It was paradise, the kind of quiet that lets a man hear his own thoughts again, until Victoria Sterling rolled into town in her silver Mercedes G-Wagon with vanity plates reading Queen_V. Victoria wasn't just a neighbor. She was a viral infection in a blazer, a woman who had moved to our quiet mountain community 3 years ago and immediately crowned herself president of the HOA, ruling with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. She treated our neighborhood meetings like her personal court, and I watched her reduce grown men to tears over the shade of their window shutters. The first shot across the bow landed on my doorstep like a declaration of war, a violation notice claiming Grandma Rose's chicken coop and potting shed, structures that had stood since the Korean War, were non-conforming eyesores that had to be demolished within 30 days or I'd face fines of $200 a day. I laughed it off at first, thinking it was a clerical error, because surely she knew that my property predated her little club by decades. But then the inspection started. Victoria would prowl my property line at dawn, wielding a tape measure like a weapon, snapping photos of my unwashed truck, counting the dandelions in my yard, her perfume lingering in the air like a chemical weapon long after she'd left. Then came the anonymous complaints, noise violations filed when I was reading a book in silence, reports of suspicious loitering when Old Man Elias came over to borrow a wrench. But it wasn't just me. She was systematically hunting the original residents, the people who had dirt under their fingernails and history in their bones. Old Man Elias was fined for his late wife's memorial garden. Elena Rodriguez, a single mom down the road, was being bled dry with fines for her kids' trampoline. I saw the fear in their eyes, the exhaustion of fighting a woman who seemed to have infinite time and money. But I'm a man who reads the fine print. I went to the Buncombe County Courthouse, diving into the dusty archives, and what I found made my blood run cold. According to the original deeds, my land, Elias's plot, and Elena's house were never legally part of the Summit Heights Association. I sent Victoria a certified letter, polite but firm, attaching the surveys that proved she had zero authority over my land. Her response? Silence. Absolute, heavy silence, followed by a nuclear escalation. 2 weeks later, a code enforcement officer from the county, a guy named Inspector Miller, showed up with a clipboard and a grim face, accusing me of running an illegal commercial auto repair shop from my garage. He showed me photos taken from deceptive angles, cropped to make Elias's truck and Elena's minivan, which I was fixing for free as a neighborly kindness, look like a full-blown chop shop. I have to investigate every complaint, Mr. Reynolds, he said, looking around my clean, quiet workshop, clearly seeing no business. But the damage was done because Victoria was building a paper trail, creating a narrative of me as a nuisance, a criminal, a blight on her pristine kingdom. That night, I drove to Asheville and bought 8 high-definition, cloud-linked security cameras with night vision and motion tracking. If she wanted a surveillance war, I was going to give her the full military-grade experience. It didn't take long for the investment to pay off. At 5:47 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I watched the live feed in glowing black and white as Victoria herself crept through the rhododendrons in my backyard, trespassing on my land to photograph my electrical meters, muttering to herself about finding a violation even if I have to invent one. I had her on tape, dead to rights, trespassing, but I held my fire because I needed to know the why. Why this obsession? Why the calculated cruelty? I dug deeper, pulling property transfer records for the last 3 years, and a pattern emerged that made me sick to my stomach. 6 houses in our neighborhood had been sold well below market value after their owners were buried in HOA fines and lawsuits, and every single one of them was purchased by a shell company called Vantage Point Holdings, which just happened to be registered to Victoria's husband. This wasn't about property values or lawn height. This was a slow-motion heist, a systematic purge of the locals to flip their homes to wealthy outsiders. I called Old Man Elias and showed him the footage, the records, the whole ugly truth. His hands, shaking with rage and age, clenched into fists as he realized that the woman destroying his wife's garden wasn't just a bully. She was a thief stealing our legacy. She destroyed the roses Martha planted. He whispered, a sound so full of pain it could have cracked stone. She tore them out while I was at the pharmacy. That was the moment the switch flipped inside me. The moment this stopped being a property dispute and became a rescue mission. But Victoria wasn't done, not by a long shot. An emergency injunction arrived the next morning, served by a deputy who looked apologetic, banning me from doing any electrical work on my own property due to imminent fire hazards cited by 3 expert witnesses who turned out to be junior associates at her husband's law firm. She froze my income, slandered my name, and then the rumors started spreading through town that I was an unstable veteran, a ticking time bomb. I hired Detective Graves, a retired investigator with a steel trap mind, to look into the connections, and what she found was a web of corruption that would make a mob boss blush. The county inspector? Victoria's college roommate. The judge who signed the injunction? Her husband's golf partner. They were strangling me with a velvet rope, using the law as a weapon to force me out. Then came the trench. The morning I woke up to find my house turned into an island was the morning I realized they had stopped playing games and started playing for keeps. The sight of that trench, a raw, gaping wound in the earth isolating my home, triggered a cold, focused anger I hadn't felt since my deployment days. Victoria was standing there in her hard hat, a designer hard hat, for God's sake, shouting over the roar of the excavator. Make it deep enough so he can't even walk out. My cameras were capturing every pixel of her arrogance, recording the audio so clearly you could hear the cruelty in her voice. I called 911, my heart hammering against my ribs. But when the fire chief arrived, he just shook his head, telling me that because my property was now inaccessible to emergency vehicles, they couldn't guarantee response times, effectively leaving me to die if a fire started. Then, predictably, Inspector Miller arrived, the same corrupt official from before, demanding I fill the trench immediately at my own expense because it violated safety codes, shrugging off my video evidence that Victoria dug it with a smirk that said, "What are you going to do about it? It was a perfect trap. She vandalizes my land, and the county fines me for the damage." But we were building an army of our own. Old Man Elias showed up at my back door, having hiked through the woods to bypass the trench, clutching a thick manila envelope that smelled of mildew and vengeance. "I kept everything, Jack," he said, his voice steady now. "Every letter, every threat, every fine for 3 years." Elena arrived 10 minutes later, breathless, her eyes wide with fear, but burning with determination, holding documents that proved Victoria had forged signatures on HOA votes. "I'm a forensic accountant," she told me, spreading papers across Grandma Rose's oak table. "These signatures? They're fakes. All of them." We turned my kitchen into a war room. Detective Graves uncovered the true motive, the holy grail of greed that explained why Victoria was risking federal prison for these 2 acres. It wasn't just about flipping houses, A geological survey from 2019 had found massive lithium deposits under our specific ridge in Black Mountain. Victoria wasn't just stealing homes. She was consolidating mineral rights worth tens of millions of dollars to sell to a mining conglomerate. She was sitting on a winning lottery ticket, and we were the only thing standing between her and a private island in the Caribbean. The escalation turned terrifying. That night, my internet cable was severed, sliced clean by vandals, plunging me into digital darkness. Then, my phone service died. I was cut off, trapped behind a dirt wall, isolated in the mountains. I climbed onto my roof, desperate for a sliver of cell signal, and managed to call Detective Graves. "They've listed your house," she said, her voice cutting through the static. "Vantage Point Holdings has a coming soon listing for your address. They're selling your house before they even own it." The psychological warfare was brutal. At 3 a.m., motion sensors flooded my room with light. I checked the monitors and saw Victoria's boyfriend creeping through Grandma Rose's prize-winning vegetable garden, wearing a backpack sprayer, dousing the heirloom tomatoes and peppers with a thick, blue liquid. By morning, everything was dead. The smell of industrial herbicide, illegal, high-potency poison, hung over the yard like a toxic shroud. It felt like a murder. Those plants were the last living connection to my grandmother, and they had withered into black, slimy rot overnight. I was recording it all, the poisoning, the trespassing, the sabotage, building a dossier that was less of a complaint and more of an indictment. But Victoria had one more card to play, one so vicious it almost broke me. The sheriff's deputies banged on my door at dawn, not to help me, but to arrest me. "Jack Reynolds," the deputy said, refusing to meet my eyes, "you're being charged with assault with a deadly weapon." Victoria had filed a police report claiming I had chased her with a shovel, screaming threats, during her inspection. She had 3 witnesses, her paid construction crew, swearing to it in written statements. It was a complete fabrication, a lie designed to lock me up over the weekend of the crucial town hall meeting where we planned to expose her. As they handcuffed me, marching me past the trench, I saw her watching from her SUV, sipping a latte, offering a tiny, pitying wave. But she had gotten lazy. She didn't know about the cameras covering the side yard. My attorney, a sharpshooter named Davis who worked pro bono for veterans, walked into the station an hour later with a thumb drive. The footage didn't just show I was innocent. It showed Victoria and her crew standing in my driveway the night before, rehearsing the lie. "You say he swung it over his head," she instructed them on the tape. "Make him sound crazy. Use the PTSD angle." The charges were dropped instantly, the deputies looking furious at being played, but the damage was intended for the community's morale. When I got back, I found Elena in tears. Someone had followed her kid's school bus, circling the stop, terrifying them. Elias received a note threatening to burn down his house. They were trying to break our spirit before the Thursday night meeting. Then came the final insult. A fake anonymous tip about a chemical smell led a DEA SWAT team to raid my property, tearing through my workshop looking for a meth lab. They found nothing but baking soda and engine grease. But the local news crews, tipped off by Victoria, were there to film the raid, broadcasting images of me being detained on my own front lawn. The headline read, "Neighborhood dispute or drug den?" They thought they had buried me. They thought the humiliation, the isolation, and the fear would make us pack up and leave. But sitting there in the ruins of my garden, smelling the poison and the diesel, I realized they hadn't buried me. They had planted me. And on the eve of the town hall, Detective Graves caught the smoking gun on audio surveillance. Victoria speaking to her husband on their patio, her voice carrying in the thin mountain air right to my parabolic microphone. "Once we clear out the trash," she laughed, clinking a glass, "the lithium deal closes, and we're on a plane to Costa Rica. The accounts are already set up. Who cares if the signatures were faked? By the time they figure it out, we'll be untouchable." She had confessed to fraud, flight risk, and conspiracy. We had it all. And Thursday night was coming. The day of the town hall meeting felt less like a civic gathering and more like the morning of a battle. The air was electric, charged with the kind of tension that precedes a lightning strike. Victoria tried one last desperate maneuver to stop us. She parked heavy machinery across my driveway again, claiming a water main emergency, trying to physically block me from attending my own vindication. But she underestimated the mountain folk. Old man Elias didn't just call a tow truck. He called the cavalry. At 5 p.m., a convoy of 30 pickup trucks, driven by neighbors from 3 different counties who had heard our story online, rolled up to my property. They didn't say a word. They just hooked chains to Victoria's barriers and dragged them out of the way, clearing a path for me. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The Black Mountain Community Center was packed beyond capacity. 200 seats were filled, and another 100 people stood along the walls, spilling out into the parking lot where speakers had been set up. The FBI agents, brought in by Detective Graves, sat in the front row wearing plain clothes, looking like sharks waiting for a drop of blood. Victoria arrived with a private security detail and a PR crisis manager, walking in like she was royalty visiting the peasants, confident that her money and her husband's connections would shield her. I walked to the podium, my hands shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline of holding the truth. Victoria smirked at me, checking her watch, clearly expecting me to rant like a madman. Instead, I didn't say a word. I just pressed play. The massive projection screen behind me lit up. First, the timeline of the forged deeds. Then, the video of her digging the trench. The room gasped as they watched her laugh about trapping a veteran. Then, the video of her rehearsing the fake assault testimony. Victoria's face went from smug to chalk white in seconds. She stood up, shouting, "This is doctored. This is illegal surveillance." But her voice was drowned out by the sheer weight of the evidence. Then came the death blow. The audio of her patio confession played through the auditorium speakers, booming off the rafters. The lithium deal closes, faked signatures. Costa Rica. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and terrifying. The entire room turned to look at her. It wasn't just a breach of rules. It was a confession of destroying lives for profit. Old man Elias stood up, tears streaming down his face, and pointed a trembling finger at her. "You poisoned my land," he choked out. "You tried to erase us." Victoria tried to run. She actually turned and shoved her PR manager aside, sprinting for the side exit, but the FBI agents were faster. They intercepted her before she hit the double doors. "Victoria Sterling," the lead agent announced, his voice carrying over the commotion. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering." The applause that erupted wasn't polite. It was primal. It was the sound of a community reclaiming its soul. They let her out in handcuffs, past the people she had tormented, past Elena, past Elias, past me. She looked at me with pure hatred, screaming, "I was improving this dump. You people are nothing." "We're neighbors," I said quietly, though I doubt she heard me over the cheering. The fallout was swift and brutal for them. Victoria was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Her husband was disbarred and is currently serving 3 years for conspiracy. Their assets were seized to pay restitution. $1.7 million returned to the victims. The Summit Heights Association was dissolved by a judge, replaced by a genuine neighborhood council where leadership rotates and no one has the power to destroy a life over a chicken coop. 6 months later, the trench is gone, filled in with rich soil and planted with wildflowers that bloom in a riot of color, brighter than any manicured lawn Victoria ever demanded. My garden has been replanted, the heirloom seeds, shared by neighbors, sprouting new life. But the best part? The community didn't just survive, it thrived. The lithium rights? We voted unanimously to place the land in a conservation trust, protecting the mountain forever from mining. We turned the potential millions into a legacy of nature, ensuring that no one can ever tear up this land again. I sit on my porch now, coffee in hand, listening to the wind in the pines. The fear is gone. The diesel smell is gone. Elena's kids run through the yards, chasing fireflies, safe. Old man Elias comes over for chess on Tuesdays. We won. But as I look at the scar where the trench used to be, I can't help but wonder about the fragility of it all. We won because I had military training, money for cameras, and the stubbornness of a mule. But what about the people who don't? What happens when the next Victoria Sterling comes for a neighborhood that can't fight back? Is justice only for those who can afford the surveillance to prove it? Tell me what you think in the comments. Would you have held the line, or would you have taken the check and run? I'm Jack Reynolds, and this is my mountain.
Alright, and that is for today's videos. I hope you enjoyed it and found something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe and share it with your friends. Let me know your thoughts in the comment below. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.